Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be listening or watching this. My name is Mark Curran and you're listening to Conscious Living. We normally air every Wednesday at 6 p.m. in Vancouver on 100.5 FM CFRO in Vancouver. And today, of course, with the situation in the world still being on lockdown downtown at the studio, we are broadcasting on Facebook Live and we'll be airing at a later date. And today it gives me great pleasure because it's Spirit Plant Medicine Conference time. And I'm here again with my good friend, co-host, and cohort, Mr. Stephen Gray. Stephen, welcome. It's always a pleasure.
Of course, Mark. We're a tag team now.
We certainly are. Awesome. So you're going to introduce our wonderful guest today. I'm excited.
I am indeed. And if you are viewing this rather than listening on Conscious Living Radio, you will see that our guest is here with us visually at the moment. And her name is Solana Booth, and she's based in Washington State in the United States. She promotes Native American and Alaskan Native traditional teachings using multiple healing modalities, such as traditional Canoe Family Skipper, speaker, doer of ancient knowings, traditional ceremonies, traditional artist, hunter and gatherer, traditional medicine keeper, family violence and recovery specialist, generational brain-spotting practitioner, Somatic Archeology Practitioner. I have to ask you about that one later, Solana. I have no idea what that is. First Foods and Lactation Educator. Like to ask about that if we get to it as well. Birth and death work, storytelling or first narratives, and her positive interconnectedness model. And a great deal more that you will see if you check out her bio at www.spiritplantmedicine.com. She's also enrolled. When I say a great deal more, I mean she has a CV which is, much longer, and didn't want to go through all of it. Solana is enrolled into the Nooksack Nation of the Chief Dan George family and Mohawk from the Bay of Quinte, where the peacekeeper was born, White Owl of the Wolf Clan. Her paternal association is Tsymsyan of the Violet Booth family, Raven Clan. She's a mother of 9 and grandmother of 2 baby girls. Sounds pretty amazing. I don't know how you do all that, but welcome, Solana.
Now, qualis cloak off CM, iskotauchi CISCM. Ishtene waji dawayu, Nooksack, Mohawk, Tsymsyan Dalawaku, Beatrice Anderson, Samuel George, Violet Atkinson, and William Booth Dalawanuth. Timakochi chante tanagus in Laksuida. Flani na limi na utsu. Awamian dimganet de luan. So it is in radical humility and prayers that I'm with you today. My name is Solana Booth, as you just said. Thank you for that. As Executive Director and Principal of Advocates of Sacred, I wanted to share some Ayak Adach, some ancestral tellings and some truth with you today. So thanks for that.
Sure. And, you can take, as I mentioned, before we hit the record button, we have a few questions for you that we've thought about ahead of time, or that at least I have. And, but you could take those anywhere you want. You just, take off on a flyer any direction you want with any of these questions. Yes.
Well, what I'd like to know, Solana, is if you can maybe tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself and your story and kind of what brought you here today in the work you're doing.
Oh, goodness gracious. That's a loaded question. Thank you for that. Yeah, thanks. So what I'm aspiring to do is I'm aspiring to open my own Recover Me and Wellness Center. And this wellness center is going to focus on generational trauma recovery and indigenous healing modalities, including introducing or reintroducing people to our plant medicines, to what we call mother's breath. And that's one of our methods that we practice in our partnering with First Foods and plant medicines, and that includes breastfeeding. So that's what we're aspiring to do. And I just wanted to take a few seconds to just acknowledge that, traveling far around the world. And I want people to know that it's coming, and that Mother Earth wants us to remember her in a good way and like reconcile our relationships with her and with each other and with ourselves. So what brought me to the generational trauma work was birthing and delivering my children, and how each pregnancy was so different from the other. And there's so many birth outcomes that can happen. My first degree was in education. And so I thought that I could change the world by being a good teacher. And it wasn't cutting it for me. It wasn't cutting it. And so I went on to documentary filmmaking, learned even more about my roots and my Indigenous birthrights, and went even deeper than that in my discipline and my commitment to a true recovery, not just for me, but for my children. And now I have grandchildren. So they're like little grandmas walking around and keeping me on my toes, and just really always keeping that with me in how I operate with my family and my work. And I was talking about allegiances that Advocates of Sacred has right now, not just in the local community in Pierce County of Washington, but King County, and then the North Sound ACH in Washington State, and then all over North America. We're trying to build alliances and allegiances to support our work in sustainable recovery.
So there's so much involved in the various aspects of the work you're doing, as I alluded to in the bio, of course. But perhaps we could start with a question like this. Excuse me. You talked about being connected to traditional teachings. I think that's a very important, interesting and important subject. And, for those people that are not particularly, which I imagine is much of the non-Indigenous or non-Native population that might be watching this or listening to it, what kind of traditional teachings are we talking about? And maybe taking that farther, what are their relevance and importance to the modern world?
Oh, goodness.
Great question. Even a little bit.
Great question. So the relevance and the importance of what's known as traditional teachings is simply that creation is so important. So that means that, people who create, so women who can carry life, are sacred. That's one of the teachings. Another teaching is the examples of anything true is outside on Mother Earth. And you'll notice that. You'll notice that if something makes you feel funny or weird or sad or mad, or jealous or envious or something, some kind of grief, you go outside and there's no evidence of that, right? Because the leaves are not jealous of the branches, and the trees not jealous of the grass, and the flower's not jealous of the fruit that's coming, and the flower has to die. So there's so many traditional teachings that are passed down orally through storytelling. And what's missing today is the interpretations. The interpretations of our stories have been off. They've been off, and they've been keeping us in a rut. They've been keeping us in lateral violence. They've been keeping us in some kind of like unrest. And now, because of the pandemic, there's compounded traumas and even greater civil unrest that we feel like it's time to not only reinterpret our creation stories to better serve us, which is what they're meant to do, rather like share these stories and share the interpretations. And it's just a must. It's a must right now.
Mm-hmm. And how's that going? Like, how much of a renaissance of the spread of these traditional teachings is actually happening?
It's going. It's kind of it's a tricky start, because I know from experience what captivates folks, and I'm talking about everybody, so many different demographics. So last year, Advocates of Sacred trained an entire tribe. So this was 74 people, healthcare providers, doctors, psychologists, in historical trauma. And the context was built on storytelling. It was built on first narrative. So this curriculum was created based on traditional teachings called storytelling, which we renamed as first narratives. So it's captivating and it brings people in, right? Anyone who's ever experienced any kind of grief, and I'll be the first and last, hopefully not the last for too long, to let everyone know that we all have suffered at least 2 traumas. And those first 2 traumas were being born and the cutting of the umbilical cord. And that's our very first 2 traumas. And we all have that in common. So that's our common ground. No matter who you are, no matter what color you are, no matter the melanin in your body, the experiences or the language that you speak, we all have the same first 2 traumas. And that's something to build on. And these teachings speak to traumas. They speak to reconciliation. They speak to being of service. And as a human family, that's really our goal. And that's why I feel like that's why Dalai Lama was so successful when he wrote that book about compassion. And he said, compassion is knowing that no one wants to be alone, and knowing that everyone wants to be happy, and knowing that we're all learning about life. And so a lot of these teachings, whether it's a storytelling or a ceremony, ceremonies come from a story. There's a story behind everything. And there's 2 different kinds of stories. So Advocates of Sacred definitely believes in the art and the practice and the employment of storytelling.
So I actually have a question on what you were talking about, the first 2 traumas, if I may. I never would have considered the cutting of the umbilical cord a trauma, because it's natural. Like, to me, circumcision is more of a trauma than, in my mind anyways. Right. So how would you bridge birth and the cutting of the umbilical cord in a non-traumatic way?
Are you asking how would you reconcile it?
Yes, or can you have birth without that being a trauma?
You cannot. You cannot. There's no birth that's untraumatic. So even the births that have 0 birth outcomes, what perinatal and prenatal psychologists, I'm a birth worker and practitioner, so I've trained other birth workers to help pregnant people not only deliver their babies, but sustain them with breastfeeding and so on, like the social, emotional, spiritual, physical aspects. So it's just not possible to birth without a trauma. Number one, the pregnant person themselves are physically suffering the entire pregnancy. They have double the amount of water and double the amount of blood, and it's their number one objective, which a lot of pregnant people aren't aware of, to truly partner with the baby in utero. And a lot of times society and communities have a lot of judgment on pregnant people. And so that stigma, that energy towards that pregnant person is real. And pregnant people aren't treated as special as they can be. Back in 2016 is when I really got amped up and motivated to correct people on their treatment of pregnant people. And that I've told many community members about, you treat your sacred instruments better than our pregnant people. Like, that's not okay. Or like you treat your canoes better than our pregnant people. That's not okay. Because really, when it comes down to it, it's about you and your own birth traumas. It's about you and how you interpreted all of those beginning experiences prior to being born, and then were affirmed right after birth. And that sets up and navigates, your life and what direction and what relationships you build or don't build.
So here's another challenging question for you, I think. What are you seeing are the results? I mean, there are these two kind of core traumas you mentioned, but then, of course, maybe over on average, especially with the native peoples who've been brutalized by, other cultures, but for everybody as well, people pick up, various other types of traumas in their early life, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe it's a two-part question that I'd like to ask you, like, what are you seeing how is that playing out in people? And then perhaps even more importantly, what are the ways that people can heal those traumas as you see them in your world?
Great question. Great question. So in the early, in regards to Indigenous people and Native people of the states, including Alaska, right? It wasn't until 1978 for the Indian Religious Freedom Act that we were able to practice singing or drumming or prayer, like the way we traditionally prayed and had ceremonies to take care of ourselves, to reconnect. And because of that, pregnant people, Indigenous pregnant people have been birthing in fear for probably 550 plus years. Mm-hmm. And that means that during the genocide or the Holocaust unspoken of, American history, his story, we were not only in conviction and marginalized, we began to marginalize ourselves through how society treated us, through how we were not being treated as human people anymore. So you could only imagine the detachment from a pregnant person and the baby in her tummy. And a lot of times I'll tell folks, like, can you imagine being a pregnant person during the Trail of Tears? Like, would you even want your baby to be born, knowing that your baby would be taken away, or knowing that, if you do start breastfeeding, your baby will be ripped out of your arms? Just give me a second. And so I still get emotional every time, because I know that, just personally, I know that I'm the first one in my family to breastfeed, and on my mom's side. And my mom is from Washington State, Native, and her mom truly, truly suffered, colonization and acts of genocide. So throughout the 550 years of being pregnant and birthing in fear of not only being displaced, of not only your baby dying either in utero or right after birth, or being taken and kidnapped and trafficked. Fast forward to today, in the 2000s, when folks aren't fully aware of our rights as pregnant people, no matter what kind of insurance we have, that generational trauma, that compounded birth trauma is real. And it sits in the epigenetics. It sits, so epi is on top of genetics, our cells. So epigenetics sits on top of our DNA, and they get activated when something in the environment is a memory, an implicit memory, something that we don't remember because we weren't physically there. It was generational. Mm-hmm. So the compounded traumas on top of the birth traumas on top of the genocide has really caused a lot of birth outcomes for Indigenous people, including low numbers and low support on breastfeeding, which, I mean, holy cannolis, breastfeeding can physiologically heal sexual trauma. So why aren't more people breastfeeding? Well, it's because they've been sexually traumatized, and when they delivered their baby, they were re-traumatized again because they didn't get the right support as a pregnant person. And now there's an entire community that's going to be impacted by this broken family, right? Or by this poor baby with a birth outcome. And this is where I get really passionate and speaking to Indigenous families and birth, and how traditionally close we are with our children, with our babies, with our grandparents, with our elders, and how that compounded brokenness still finds its way through when we don't take these opportunities to do the work, to truly reconcile those first two traumas in ourselves.
Hmm. So again, the question that follows out of that, if I may, and actually it could lead into sort of the next area of discussion as well, is, what kinds of methods, practices are working to help people? And then maybe I could save this one for a few minutes later, or we could, but, because it's the Spirit Plant Medicine
Yeah,
Conference that we're dealing with here, we will be wanting to find out what your relationship is with the entheogenic medicines as part of that healing, and how that's working and what you do and so on and so on.
definitely. Um, and so the methods that have been working, so Advocates of Sacred has many, we have our methods, we have our axiologies, our logic of inquiries, our alchemies that we are constantly growing and cultivating. And there's adversaries and community members and really amazing, amazing people that we cross-reference and check it with to make sure that there's no errors in it, because we want to be all inclusive. We don't want to try and treat a person or a client with a certain method or modality when it's not suiting them. And when I talk about these clients or these folks that we're treating, um, it's not just Indigenous people, it's everybody. And that's how inclusive and how true these methods are. That's how true these knowings can be, is that it's for the human family. Um, our focus is Indigenous people and Natives, of course, and we won't turn folks away either at the same time. Um, so the methods are somatic archaeology, generational brain spotting, um, storytelling, so helping folks find their story, and having the background of education, understanding the physiological, biological, interpersonal, spiritual, social, emotional relationships on across all those dynamics really helps me to facilitate and train others to really go as deep as they can in themselves, so that when they're in front of a client or in front of a person that they need to be providing service for, they can bring them as deep as they've gone. We also practice with plant medicine, mushrooms, psilocybin, and have sessions with that. And it just depends on what has been working. A lot of times a session with one client can be an hour to 2 hours. And what we're doing is we're educating and we're building trust, and we're building on that foundational relationship, so that if there is work that's being done, which means reconciliations are happening for that person, for that birth trauma, for that sexual trauma, for that neglect or domestic violence or substance use disorder, then we do get to a certain point where we can introduce or reintroduce mother's breath, which is the plant medicine, the psilocybin.
So when you work with psilocybin, you're usually doing it in a one-on-one scenario, therapeutically, rather than ceremonially in a group, for example?
It is ceremony one-on-one and in small groups. That's happened as well. There's a protocol that we like to follow when the plant's introduced.
As
Same,
you know,
same with all the other, sorry, same with the other modalities, like with brain spotting and somatic archaeology and the first narratives, the birth work. There's protocols for every aspect of that with the client, with the person, because above all, even if they don't feel like they got healed or they got something, they're going to understand the protocol, which is the context, which is the main point. They're going to understand that, and they're going to be able to practice that and take that with them.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about peyote. As you know, the Native American Church is very prominent, I guess you could say. I believe there are up to 400,000 members, mostly in the western half of the United States, and an ancient tradition of working with that medicine. Are you guys connected to that at all? Do you work with it at all? No.
Advocates of Sacred is not at this time, but I did mention prior to the record happening that we are in allegiance with Decriminalized Nature National, and they are supporting and helping, even providing some technical assistance to churches that go into peyote medicine as well. We just haven't yet. And yeah, right now we're really trying to build what we have. And we're very much a strength-based and evidence-based organization. We believe in our relationships, not only with other entities and tribes and organizations, but other medicines at some point.
Mark, you look like you're going to ask a question there. Go ahead. Your mic's off. Your mic's off, Mark.
Yeah, I did. It just slipped my mind as I started wandering and everything that was being said. But now it came back. My question is, there's a lot of work happening in the decriminalized nature field right now. What's happening with the work and the support you're doing? What are you seeing in that movement down in the United States right now?
Oh, so we're seeing a lot of movement around decriminalized nature. Some other folks are starting their own entheogens. I'm also a member of the Washington State Entheogen Society, and we're looking to change our name, hopefully to something more indigenous, because we're on Salish territory. So that's my thing right now is like reclaiming not only our birthrights and our honoring the folks who occupied certain territories originally. And, mostly, like I keep saying, it's about reintroducing people to mother's breath, to build on that trust, to build on that foundational objective of being in that relationship. And so that's the whole, that goes a little bit into the ceremony that we practice with psilocybin, with the local plants, all of the plant medicines that we go into ceremony with, or that we treat people with, or that we practice in our methods called first aids. Everything's local, all the plants. So none of them have been transplanted here. The Northwest is so beautiful and rich. Like, we can grow anything here. And Advocates of Sacred chooses to only employ the plants that have traditionally been here pre-contact.
And that was my next question leading up to now, just to clarify, when you refer to mother's breath, you are referring to psilocybin mushrooms.
Yes.
Correct. And then you pretty much answered my question about the local, using what you can find obviously locally and naturally. Is there a specific strain that you would refer to as mother's breath, or would it be what you find locally? Because there are a number of different strains in that area, right?
There is a lot of different strains here, and we're like physically discovering that on our own, on her canvas, on Mother Earth. It's just so beautiful out there right now with the fall. And every time I start talking about being outside on Mother Earth, there's like all these creation stories that come to me. So that's where the silence goes, like when I stop talking for a second. But yeah, we only practice with traditional plant medicines. There's not one particular strain of the mushroom that we call mother's breath. It's all about trusting that first relationship for us and advocating for her and her needs and how she can heal, we can heal. We're one and the same. Mother Earth and people are created the same exact way, and the evidence is outside as well as in us.
Beautiful. Yeah. So as far as I know, there's no, what you might say, public or published history of psilocybin mushroom use amongst Native Americans. But of course, they've been there forever. And I would assume that people always knew what was in their environment that was edible, or could be used for building materials, or could be used for medicine, or could be used for spiritual purposes. So do you have any awareness of the history of the use of psilocybin mushrooms in your area?
Yeah, Stephen, that's a great question. That's been a lot of the work that we've been doing, especially with our plant medicine with Mother's Breath, is delving deeper, not only into researching traditional stories and creation stories, which are pre-contact based, there's a lot of partnering with mushrooms. There's a lot of partnering and knowing that. So myself, for example, and my partner, when we've been in the woods, when we've been, out on Mother Earth, foraging for plants or foraging for food, or just kind of checking out different parts of the land, the plants will talk. They'll call me to them. A lot of, not a lot, but select few families, lineage wise. So I'm talking about blood and hereditary birthrights, have direct relationships with the plants. And there's creation stories to support that. And I know that I'm living proof because I know what I feel when I go into the woods and I'm not particularly seeking a certain plant or medicine. They'll call me to them. Like I'll end up going straight to them, exactly what was needed. It's so powerful and so beautiful. And it's also radically humbling to not only experience that, but to learn the creation stories behind that. And again, these stories are pre-contact. There's songs that go with these stories, and in these stories explains that partnership, that relationship to the plants. And I'll definitely go into that in Remembering Mother's Breath at the conference. I'll share some of that creation story.
Wonderful. Yeah. So on that note, also,
Stephen, there's also artwork that has mushrooms. And if you know anything about Northwest coastal art, it's the oldest artifact of art was like 16,000 years old. And our art says a lot about who we are as a people. It's so sustainable. It's so rich. And there's a meaning behind every single symbol and color that's used. And there is art that's pre-contact that has these plant medicines in it.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I wanted to ask another related question because this is an oral tradition, or these are oral traditions, because there are artifacts that have been party to keeping that lineage of knowledge, the thread alive, so to speak. A question that always is of interest to me, because they exist in quite a number of what you might call traditional or indigenous cultures, is are there ancient prophecies about this time with your people, as there are with, say, people from South America and other areas of the world, that they talk about? You mentioned the 550-year period of suffering. Some people have called it the 500-year dark age, that's changing now, and so on. Are you tuned into or aware of any of that kind of prophecy or information?
Definitely. Yeah, there is stories and what you call prophecies that explain exactly what's happening. Me and my knowings see the last 500 plus years as an opportunity to stay strong, to stay resilient. And I know that for thousands of years prior to the genocide and the Holocaust unspoken of, that my current ancestors have experienced, I know that prior to that, it was way different. And that's where I gain my strength and my knowings. And that's where I can connect to is pre-contact, is Mother Earth, the star people, the plant medicine, Mother's Breath. As a descendant of that first being who called the plants, there's just some knowings that are true. And anytime me and my partner or my family, when we want to cross-reference something or check it, like look for evidence, we find it, and it's there. Another thing, just to like reaffirm the storytelling and the oral traditions, I always want to amplify the power of our stories and the power of oral tradition, and just remind folks that a lot of religions are books of people's interpretations of oral tradition. And I think the difference here is that a lot of our stories are not published in one book, because, I feel like we generally and typically crave to be all inclusive. So I feel like there just hasn't been a person that has said, this is going to be the story and this is how it's going to get written, and that's it. However, the Advocates of Sacred is working on, so we filmed a bunch of stories this year because of the pandemic to just keep the stories alive and get them out there. And what we're doing now is we're editing those stories so that they'll be online pretty soon here.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's a great point, that that the stories live, and people add their own energy into keeping them alive. But I have to know what somatic archaeology is.
Okay. Okay. So I was educated on a master's level in somatic archaeology. So I'm a practitioner of that. It's a domestic healing modality. And all that means is that we can bill insurance. So if I was soughting after only being a practitioner of that, like that'd be totally doable. All across North America, at least I know that for sure. So somatic archaeology has its own 5-step protocol, and each part of the protocol allows the person in need or who needs a service to stay inside of their body, and excavate where the stagnation of water is, where the trauma rested. Now, in order to do that, I get to not only engage with the person and ask them about, what's going on physically, like what happened, because I want to biologically decode the trauma before we do the session, before the somatic archaeology. So biologically decoding, all it means and all it says is that, again, same thing outside on Mother Earth. It says that when a certain trauma happens, when a certain event or experience that caused you to hold your breath in fear or sadness or anger or any kind of grief, that put a little pin in the map on your body somewhere. It also did something in your brain, like at the same exact time. And so I know right away that if there was something going on with the left shoulder and they're right-handed, I know that there must have been some kind of scolding or something from a trusted guardian or caregiver when they were between the ages of 3 and 5. I know that. So that's biological decoding. And when you look outside on Mother Earth, there's only certain rivers that go to the ocean. There's only certain plant medicines 5,000 feet above on the mountain. There's only certain cedar trees in certain areas of the world. There's only certain eagles that live in certain areas of the world. Like, so Mother Earth has her own organized protocol, just as our body does too. So when I get to biologically decode a physical ailment, accident, or injury, it can execute that healing, that sustainable recovery, that excavation of the trauma. Sometimes we can go generationally. So there's like generational reconciliations that can happen. And it's like instant. It's instant and it's sustainable. The accident, ailment, or injury does not come back. I guarantee you that if there's any kind of weird accidents that continue happening, like generationally, I know everyone can relate to that. And that's just how it happens until somebody finally wants to take the opportunity to reconcile that.
Wonderful, yeah.
So when you do somatic work, are you incorporating plant medicines with that?
I have not yet. And okay, I haven't done it with other folks yet, but I've gone into the plant medicine by myself, and I can give myself a session. And when I say I go into the plant medicine, sometimes I don't ingest any because I have already prior. And I feel like maybe I love her so much or she loves me so much that the moment I can go into prayer, it's like I feel like I'm in the plant medicine, and I know I'm not because I didn't drink anything or eat anything of it. But my body remembers being there. My body remembers that kind of truth. And so I've definitely had sessions on or in plant medicine.
And I just wanted to acknowledge one thing. I love how you changed your word earlier in sense when you said I have to work, I get to work with them.
Yes.
So I just wanted to acknowledge that because it's such a small linguistic change, but so powerfully different. So
thank you.
I just wanted to acknowledge
that's part of my that's part of my training. I have to definitely publicly reframe things because I get it. Like I know where people are at, and I just want to remind you of where we're at and where we need to be. So
excellent. Yeah. You know, I wanted to, I'm curious about some of the other plant medicines that you've spoken of and, you know, maybe some of the more powerful ones. But also, as I thought of that, I also thought about one particular plant, which is getting a lot of attention these days for its healing benefits, named cannabis. But I also know partly because I spent about a dozen years going to quite a few Native American church peyote ceremonies, that in that community, in general, they do not like cannabis at all because it's been part of the addiction cycle and the escapism cycle. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about, you know, can cannabis be part of the healing in your world, or is it basically kind of, you know, pushed aside these days?
Definitely. Thanks for bringing that up. I actually just had a conversation with my partner the other day about cannabis. Advocates of Sacred and the local indigenous tribes and organizations, we definitely see today's cannabis misusage and abuse of that plant in not a good light. We do see it as more like of a substance that folks can self-medicate with. Traditionally, cannabis, traditionally a lot of indigenous people, we grew hemp, right? And if you know anything about hemp can be so strong. I mean, if you have a bunch of big collective of hemp, it could be stronger than oak, right? And it can clean more air than trees. Like it's just it's a powerful plant. And we understood and partnered with that particular plant until they took it away. And, even today there's tribes that are, that have been advocating for our plant sovereignty, our food sovereignty, our traditional medicines and our ceremonies to hopefully bring back those parts of that particular plant. I know that I've not gone into the cannabis plant, and I don't plan on it just because of the synthetics and all the unnatural chemicals or mistreatments of even, making of it. And I just hope that, again, with advocating for mother's breath and promoting truth and promoting some kind of awareness or awakening in folks, that they can come back to themselves. They can come back to their truth, to their highest self, or at least figure out that they're self-medicating, or at least figure out that they deserve even a little bit better, or at least figure out some part of them. And my heart started to hurt a little bit talking about cannabis and how traditionally, like, this is again another family member, another relative that has been harmed for multiple generations, and now it's being exploited, it's being trafficked, and it's no different than our people, than our women, than our children. And that's really how serious it is for us, for me anyway.
I understand. Yeah, understood.
One quick question. Do you have a website for your advocacy work?
We do, and it's being built. So I just went on there the other night, and it looks okay. There's a nice video on there. There's just some misinformation, but the website is www.advocateofsacred.com. And we are on LinkedIn, and yeah, we're hoping to start building up our internet platform, and we'll be sharing definitely more storytelling videos this winter which is the perfect time for storytelling. We'll talk about interpreting them and reinterpreting our traditional ceremonial stories as well, which we know is going to cause a lot of conflict and cause people to maybe frown at us, or you know what I mean? Because we're talking about changing systems here, and people are too complacent in their stuff. And it's unacceptable for me to witness that anymore.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm not sure that non-native people have always understood. Well, of course they wouldn't, but you know, and I don't say that judgmentally, but understand how to put this, how fragile this kind of knowledge is. You know, having been around the Native American church, they're much more protective of their rituals than, say, the ayahuasca people in South America, for example, you know. And, you know, I understand that. You know, I have a great sympathy for that because basically, you know, to put it crudely, you know, the history shows that anytime you know, the European based people get their hands on these things, then they quickly get watered down or corrupted or commodified or whatever. So, you know, the rituals of the Native American church are really powerful. The container that they hold is, I've been in quite a few different environments, and there's nothing quite like that. You know, that everything that happens in that teepee is for a reason. It's to allow the spirit to come in and heal and make sure that nothing gets in the way of that, right? So I understand how protective they need to be, but at the same time, there's this whole thing going on that, you know, you've alluded to already. It's like the information has to get out, right? You know, this is the time, right?
It does. Yep, it does. And there has to be, you know, I'm a firm believer in sharing information and sharing the wealth of healing and sharing the resources of this kind of connection. And it starts with education. It starts with inviting people to this kind of initiation. And I'm saying initiation because it's got to be, there has to be those virtues of integrity, vulnerability, trust, discipline, commitment. There has to be, like, those things have to be evident in order to build on that relationship to start that sharing. So I know I've mentioned certain allegiances and alliances that Advocates of Sacred is building, and we have those tough conversations. And these are not Indigenous based organizations. Like, one is a Black and African American community. One is a church, like a white, you know, non, you know, church organization. And then another is an international movement of people. So these are the kind of conversations that we are inviting people to have. You know, we want to promote Indigenous based healing modalities. We want to promote recovery from generational traumas, no matter what color you are. We definitely are promoting Native health and wellness, just because we're here in our traditional pre-contact territories, and we're partnering with those plants. We're partnering with this medicine. We're partnering with those ancient knowings that has allowed me to be here in this position right now, speaking with you.
Wonderful.
Did I answer your question?
Oh yeah. No, I was just leaving some space in case Mark wanted to say anything. And plus I figured you know, if you're going to get it squeezed into Conscious Living Radio, you might want to be winding things up now, Mark. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we certainly got a few more minutes. If there's anything specific you still had to ask, we've got about, you know, 7-8 minutes that we can carry on. Certainly not a problem.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, then I'm still curious about. I know. Well, let me preface it this way. I'm aware that in the Mestizo Amazonian traditions of ayahuasca, ayahuasca is kind of like the big mother, the capital M Madre, but there are quite a few, perhaps several dozen other what they call master plants. And they're, as far as I have understood, oftentimes considered as important as the ayahuasca itself in the work, you know, that they do different things like, for example, people will diet on a particular plant by simplifying the rest of their diet down to as little as possible, and then taking it in a tea or whatever. And it's not necessarily, well, it usually isn't what we would call psychoactive in the, you know, sort of conventional sense, but they will have, for example, extremely lucid dreams in which the plant teaches them about their own trauma, their own past, what they're doing now, where they're going, and that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering, are there, for example, but just take this anywhere you want to, but are there particular other master plants that you folks work with, and how that works, I guess, is a two-part
Definitely.
question. Yeah.
There is. And I don't know how much time I have to answer this, but no,
7 or 8 minutes.
okay, perfect. This question is so exciting for me right now because recently I discovered this ancient plant that is so powerful, and it, um, did a bunch of research on it, figured out the cellular structure of it, the two backbones of the alkaloid steroids of it, and I did find out that this plant was used to treat PTSD, to treat, to have hallucinations, to go into a different kind of spiritual realm. And, again, it was kind of the same thing. And this plant was partnered with by my ancestors as well, like by my direct lineage of people, and understanding again, where on Mother Earth does this plant live, and what other plants support the life of this plant. And I promise you, it's so miraculous how these plants are aligned on the canvas of Mother Earth, just as we are. Like, our brain is up here for a reason. Our heart is right here for a reason. And this core is the hottest and warmest, part of our body for a reason. And it's the same thing on Mother Earth. And talking about the power of certain plants, which are, I really don't see one particular plant being more powerful than another, because every single plant has its purpose. So there's plants that we partner with to make certain teas to help people with degeneration, circulation and blockage, or inflammation. And that would be necessary if we wanted to go into a session. Like, we would want these folks to practice some breath work. We would want these people to be aware and reintroduce themselves to the plant world, to Mother Earth's breath. We want to follow our methods and our protocols to reclaim our relationships, and know that, like, just like your kidney is not more important than your liver, and your brain is not more important than your foot. You know what I mean? Of course you can do without one kidney, but semantics. Right?
You read my mind.
Yeah, it's you suffer a great loss when an organ fails you, right? Just like you suffer a great loss in real time during experiences, during these compounded traumatic pandemics. We marginalize ourselves even stronger. We internalize grief even deeper. And so we need more than just this beautiful psilocybin mushroom. We need other plant medicines to help facilitate that relationship, to help facilitate that reminding of this birthright, that reminding of this knowing, of reinterpreting this creation story, so that we can initially, circling back around, go back to our first two traumas, go back to generational reconciliation, so that our great, 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 great grandchildren, or I like to say my grandchildren's grandchildren, don't have to carry the burden and the load that I've had to carry. Yet the work will have been done. I want them to take it farther and enjoy it even more.
Beautiful.
Well, very well said. And so now here's my question as we do wrap up, Solana, is what can we do as individuals? There's so much going on in the world today. There's so much uncertainty, upheaval, unrest in so many areas. There's so much opportunity as well for so many people, depending on, kind of where you're at and how you kind of approach life. But what's the best thing that we can do as individuals to help impact humanity, the planet, in the best way?
That's a great question, Mark. I would invite So Ishtainawaji, Solana, soon to be Tlahatlan, mother, grandmother, daughter, partner, sister, friend, niece, future ancestor. I would invite the human family to consider recovering their highest self and truly trusting plant medicine, truly trusting mother's breath. Even just imagining what that would look like, even just imagining that this natural plant known as mother's breath could and will help you recover your highest self, could and will promote sustainable life, could and will further your healing. And if you could just even imagine that beginning step, I feel like even saying the word trust, saying the word relationship does something for your body, does something for your breath. Those are really strong, powerful words. And so it's changing a little bit, even just speaking to that idea. And so if we could just start there, that's something to build on. We just need one thing to build on. We need something to build on, and then we're golden.
Amazing.
I love trust.
Yes.
Trust. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for that.
Thank you for the question. That was great. I wasn't expecting that one.
Well, it's just, I believe that, that we're going through interesting times, some of the most interesting that humanity has ever seen. And, there's so much information, misinformation, unknown truth to information. And, we tend to, in some cases in the Western world, overcomplicate things.
Yes.
Some.
And that's why
overthinking.
Like, what's the one thing? If we were to just simply do something to help not just ourselves, but have that ripple throughout, the world and the universe, what is that? And I love your answer. I thank you so much for bringing that.
You're welcome. I hope you get to listen to Remembering Mother's Breath, because I build on that.
Oh, I'll be there.
Yeah. Okay, great.
I'll be there. Absolutely.
We're there, man.
All weekend. We're in it. I'm there right now. So, it's just like the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference actually starts a week from tomorrow.
Yep.
And we're wrapping up all the final interesting tech stuff as we figure out the new virtual world and, getting everything dialed in. And it's exciting times for us. And this is the one thing I trust. It's all going to work out and it's going to be fantastic. I don't always know how that's going to be, but it's always works.
At least 4 times a day. Say the word trust. Just get it over with first thing in the morning and see what happens.
Absolutely. And we look so forward to what you have to share, and that you're part of our family now. And, it's going to be a great time. So for anybody watching, Solana also has a coupon code for you. If you're watching this interview, it's Booth 2020. So visit spiritplantmedicine.com. You can see our full list of presenters. You can check everything else out there. We got a few different levels of entry, and Booth 2020, you can save yourself 11% there. And we certainly look forward to, a great event. It's going to be a new way of doing things. We're looking to make it as interactive as possible for those watching, and take the virtual conference to a new level is our goal and our intention. And I thank you for trusting and being part of what we're doing here. I thank you too, Stephen, for being trusting and going with the flow in what we're creating, because, we're kind of creating it as we go, as we would say in my experience in the Tony Robbins world. We don't always know how things are going to work out. We just know they will, and we remain flexible and make things happen. So, we're very excited about what the conference is going to be like this year, and it's something to look forward to. So thank you very much for your work. And if you have any closing words, Stephen, now is your time, my friend.
Oh yeah. No, it's just thank you, Solana. really deeply impressed. My heart has been moved to hear much of what you have said. You're doing fantastic work. I don't know how you do it all, but it's wonderful. So thanks a lot for sharing that with people today. And I too look forward to hearing, greatly look forward to hearing what you're going to share with people at the conference. And to just bless you and all your family to stay well at this time and carry on with your work, that the Spirit may be right with us all the way.
Absolutely. And I basically second what Stephen's saying. I love the way you just bring in your roots and your lineage and, that authenticity to the work we do. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for today. Thank you for your time. My hands go up to both of you for all the work you're doing. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right. Well, you've been listening to this Spirit Plant Medicine episode of Conscious Living here on 100.5 FM CFRO Co-op Radio in Vancouver. I was joined today with my friend and co-host, Stephen Gray, and our very special guest, Solana Booth. You can see this on consciouslivingradio.org, spiritplantmedicine.com, our YouTube channel. It's out there if you want to follow up and see it again. So thank you very much for watching and listening, everyone. And until next time, stay well.